Welcome everyone back to weekly weather updates, and in today's video we're going to have a look at the latest from the live radar, run through the UKV, have a look at the precipitation and the temperature over the next 5 days as it is turning a little bit more unsettled, and those temperatures are going to be a little bit more up and down as we have more of a westerly influence coming in for the rest of this week. Again, no huge deluges, maybe some heavier rain in places, but it will generally just be a little bit more unsettled and a little bit more miserable out there, especially in the north and west. We'll have a look at the long range in the second half of the video. Of course, we've got a sudden stratospheric warming propagating through the atmosphere, and we are keeping a very close eye on what happens with that over the coming weeks. And as we'll see from the majority of operational runs today, they're starting to show some real amplification towards the last week of February. Again, nothing ridiculously cold, nothing huge, cold and blocked like you'd expect or think that could happen from a sudden stratospheric warming, but signs that we could be seeing something at least a little bit colder. I do think from the looks of it, it's to do with the MJO going into phases 6, 7 and 8, where that does encourage amplification of the jet stream and mid-Atlantic ridges. So I do think what we're seeing from the models is because of that. But the SSW over the coming weeks could aid that and can allow it to maintain. So for the first time, we're starting to see some effects from the MJO going into this phase 6, 7 and 8, and potentially from the sudden stratospheric warming as well, potentially setting up a little bit of a colder period, whether that's just transient northerly winds or actual proper northerly flow come the last week of February. But of course, we'll explore what the models are showing in a bit. So do remember, if you enjoy my videos, make sure you like and subscribe, and remember to follow me on Twitter as well, the link's in the description. So if we do start on the live radar, you can see there are a few showers around in the north and the west at the moment. Some of these are quite heavy, but only really isolated in places, and most areas are just seeing some thicker cloud at the moment, so nothing too crazy. And of course I'm recording this around 10 AM in the morning. If you put on the temperatures, again, you'll be able to see it is cooler further northwards and eastwards, where we do have slightly clearer skies and slightly colder air masses. But further westwards, look at all those yellows pushing in, a big milder sector coming in for most through today. So temperatures will be on the up, probably around 10 to 12 degrees quite widely. And again, overnight temperatures will be up and down. There could be a few frosts here and there, but it could also be quite mild as well. So if you do now go over to the UKV and have a look at what it's showing for the precipitation and the temperature over the course of the next 5 days, as we head through this afternoon, you can see clearer skies further eastwards, that cloud early this morning, all that we're seeing as I'm recording this, fading away and seeing a few showers pushing in, but again, nothing too crazy. Through this evening into tomorrow, we do see some rain starting to push in from the west. Quite heavy initially, but again, it does fade away as it progresses eastwards. A bit of wind chillness over the high ground of Scotland. Beyond that, Wednesday into Thursday, more rain pushing in. Could be quite widespread there, but it is mostly light to moderate and just, again, accompanied quite a lot of thick, miserable cloud. Through the rest of Thursday, it does clear up, but there could be a lot of drizzle patches around and some more heavier rain pushing into Scotland, and that continues into Friday as well. Could be a little bit of a stormy period there on Friday into Scotland with a deep little low pressure system. We'll have a look at the wind gust temporarily there in a second. And again, generally just quite horrible with a lot of thick cloud and patches of rain pushing in. But again, no huge deluges, no massive walls of rain that we can see this time of year, just generally fading weather fronts coming up against that higher pressure. If you look at those wind gusts just temporarily, you can see there through the early hours of Friday, maybe 60 or 70 mile per hour gusts. That could be adjusted. We'll have to see exactly what happens with that. Again, maybe a yellow warning issued for wind for that, but of course we'll have to see. But yeah, it could be a briefly stormier period through Thursday night into Friday. If you now look at the max temperatures, you can see through this afternoon temperatures widely around that 10 to 13 degree mark, really quite mild for the time of year. And again, it's all because of that milder sector pushing in from the west. Overnight temperatures won't drop away all too much, maybe down to a couple of degrees, maybe like 2 or 3 degrees overnight in a few spots where it's slightly cooler, but again, not expecting anything particularly cold. Into tomorrow afternoon, you can see maybe 10 to 13 degrees once again in the evening after not too cool overnight temperatures, and then into Thursday overnight temperatures again maybe 5 or 6 degrees cooler in Scotland, and then into the afternoon maybe 10 to 13, again pretty mild, and then into Friday quite a very mild there, 10 to maybe 15 degrees appearing. That is incredibly mild for the time of year, but of course it will be accompanied by a bit of drizzle and thicker clouds, so it probably won't all feel too great out there. And into the weekend, it will turn cooler in Scotland, but still hanging on to those low teens in the far south, and that continues into Sunday as well. So you can see it is going to be pretty mild the rest of this week. There will be up and down temperatures. Again, we'll have to just keep an eye on how up and down they are. But there are cooler air masses trying to push in from the north, so there will be slightly cooler weather at times through Scotland and generally northern areas. And it could drift southwards, but from the looks of the UKV today, very much trending on a very mild period this next 5 days or so. If you do go over now to have a look at some of the long-range charts, go back to the zone and mean winds charts. We've been looking at this daily for the last few days to try and keep an eye on the southern stratospheric warming and see how it does propagate through the atmosphere. Now, the SSW is officially happening around 24 hours from now, sort of in the next 24 hours, really. Again, we'll see exactly when it does happen, probably in the next few days. But pretty much now it is starting to occur, and you can see through the high levels of the atmosphere it's going to remain extremely weak, the polar vortex, even with negative anomalies, so easterly winds in the stratosphere for the next couple of weeks, really. But we've got to see it propagate through the atmosphere if we're going to see any impacts. And you can see on the right chart here with the anomalies, we're not seeing too much propagation yet. Some slithers of lighter blues, and it is generally tracking slightly lower in the atmosphere. The gradient of that really isn't all too much. You know, it's around 10 HPA right now, and it perhaps is going to drift down to 30 HPA in 2 weeks' time. So we'd need to see a lot more propagating of that if we were going to see actually any impacts towards the surface. But it does look likely here that there could be slightly slower westerly momentum. And the reason why, I think what we'll see in a minute with the general precipitation, pressure charts, seeing some amplification, I do think it's from the MJO, simply because looking at this, it's not the stratosphere, the sun stratospheric warming has propagated through all too much yet within the models. But again, things can change very quickly, and there are signs there is a little bit more slowing of the westerly momentum. Is it connected to the SSW or is it just the MJO? I would sway more towards the MJO, but we can't say for certain, really. We'll just have to keep an eye on what happens over the course of the next few days. But SSW taking place, going to encourage more blocking over the coming weeks, potentially producing more cooler and more blocked weather towards the surface. But as we'll see now with the longer range charts, it does look likely just organically with those MJO phases, we are going to potentially see some slightly colder weather. If we do run through this chart, you can see lower pressure running through over the next few days, generally quite a mild flow, but high pressure returning for early next week. Still seeing low pressure trying to ride over the top of it, and at day 10 we see a bit more Atlantic ridging. Now the GFS is not the most bullish on this, but it does build high pressure over the top of us and tries to temporarily pull in easterly winds and amplify that jet stream much further northwards. It doesn't actually produce anything particularly cold for the UK, this GFS run, but it has a very similar pattern to what the GEM and the ECMWF are showing, which do both go colder, and so do the ensemble members as well. You can see here we're not seeing particularly cold upper air temperatures, really. Cold air is drifting into Eastern Europe, but nothing too cold air because the Atlantic ridge is really over the top of us, bringing slightly cool northeasterly winds, so it would be chilly, but nothing crazy cold. But it's that general pattern of more amplification with a higher pressure trying to reach towards Greenland, not being too successful, but being successful enough to keep us under higher pressure with a cooler northeasterly flow. However, if we do run to the GEM, you'll be able to see that it's a very similar pattern, but slightly different outcome at the surface. If you run through, you see a westerly flow over the coming days, more higher pressure building up over the top of us, and more of a northwesterly flow there through early next week. So high pressure drifting slightly further southwards. And look what happens at day 10. That high pressure ridges towards Iceland and Greenland, but a few hundred miles further westwards, or maybe 1,000 miles or so further westwards. And what this does is it means we go into a cold northerly flow. You look at the upper air temperatures, pretty chilly air coming down, the -5 isotherm pushing through, the -10 isotherm drifting our way, with the temperature deviation, cooler about 4 to 6 degrees below average for the time of year, and much colder air exiting Greenland and Iceland. Again, this wouldn't give us a bitterly cold, sustained period that you'd expect potentially from an SSW, but this is definitely an Atlantic ridge producing a transient northerly wind. And of course, if the higher pressure gets up northwards enough and hangs on and gets some aid from that blocking and that warmth and those weakening of the zonal marine winds propagating through the atmosphere because of the sudden stratospheric warming, it could hold on perhaps a little bit longer. But from the signs here, it is an Atlantic ridge, a brief northerly wind that may last a couple of days or so before toppling, but at least a little bit of a change, a little bit more towards a colder pattern, more amplification of the jet stream, potentially cooler weather. And of course, I do think it's from the MJO simply because we're not seeing any huge blocking over the Arctic. It's very much originating from the Atlantic, again very much going along with the typical Atlantic ridging from the MJO phases 6, 7 and 8. If you look at the ECMWF, it does produce something quite similar. Again, a westerly flow pushing in over the coming days. High pressure trying to return for early next week, but eventually we do build another Atlantic ridge, even slightly further westwards here. And again, this would encourage even cooler air to push in. Again, nothing too bitterly cold here yet, because it's about a day or two lagged behind the GEM, but the -5 isotherms pushing in, and very cold air is starting to exit out of the Arctic into Scandinavia, out of Greenland as well, towards the UK and generally northwest Europe. Again, you can see from the pressure charts, this high pressure is heading towards Greenland. Again, it could just topple because there isn't any huge blocking over the Arctic, but we are seeing a transfer of the tropospheric polar vortex towards the Siberian side. If you want any cold weather, that's where you need the polar vortex to be. If we did see some weakening over north of Canada, a bit more higher pressure, it would allow more Atlantic ridges as the lower pressure and westerly momentum out of North America would be weaker, and it would encourage more northerly and easterly winds. So definitely this ECMWF chart here is definitely favouring potentially cooler or colder spells. Anything bitterly cold, sustained, beast from the east like, probably not, but you can't say for certain, but definitely more towards a cooler end of the month and start to March potentially here. Again, you can see very cold air still in North America. It really is bitterly cold air, but the lower heights are transferring further eastwards, and that's where the cold air will start to build. I must say though, I've said this in past videos over the last sort of week or so, North America looks like it could be going very cold in the coming weeks. Look at that, -10 to -12 degrees below average there through North America, through Canada and United States for a very large region. So yeah, with the tropospheric polar vortex sat over Canada at the moment, does it likely that North America is going to go really, really quite cold in the coming weeks? If we do go over to the ensembles now, you can see generally in the next week to up to around 10 days, it's average to above average generally with lower precipitation. Low precipitation continues, but you can see for around that sort of 23rd to around the 28th, it's slightly cooler than average with quite a few colder runs appearing, and that's because of that northerly flow coming in from that Atlantic ridge, a bit of that amplification in the jet stream. Again, we can't say that it's going to be anything bitterly cold, but definitely a trend more towards it today, and a little bit of a colder little spell potentially starting to develop. Again, I do think it is because of the MJO changing phases. I don't think it is at this stage from any impacts of the SSW, but of course if the SSW did propagate through, it could aid and create more longevity in this, and could build that high pressure further northwards as well. So it is a whole connecting chain, and we'll just have to see how it does develop. It could be the first building blocks of potentially a properly cold spell, or it could just be a transient northerly that lasts a few days. Of course, we'll keep you updated on what happens with that. But quite a few runs going quite cold there through the last week of February. And look at the G points again, pretty chilly indeed, down below freezing. And if we just finish on the ECMWF ensemble members, again, you can see a cooler trend there through the 24th to the 26th. Again, few runs going quite cold there down to the -10 level, but others recovering it. So a bit of a split, but majority are producing slightly cooler conditions for a time, but we'll just have to keep an eye on how long it could last and how potentially severe it could be. But at this stage, just an Atlantic ridge, a bit of colder northerly flow, a bit of a change to what we're seeing at the moment, and what we'll probably be seeing for the next week or so. So anyway, thanks for watching. Hope you've enjoyed. Make sure you do enjoy the generally mild weather out here over the next week or so. There will be cloud and rain around, but it will be really quite mild, so it'll be pretty decent to get out there and do stuff if you've got anything planned. Because I keep saying, the end of February into early March, even if we don't see any huge beast in the east or anything like that that is being pushed by some, it could still go reasonably cold once again, whether it's just frost and fog and a brief northerly wind, or whether it's proper cold air and maybe snow. We'll have to see, but the potential is there, and of course a bit of a respite of any cooler weather the last week or two and this coming week or so. So make sure you enjoy it. As I said, it could be turning cooler towards the end of the month, but of course we'll keep you updated here. So anyway, thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you again for another video soon.